Hello, I'm Joshua Mills. I'm your instructor in this section of JRN 4200, press coverage of politics and policy, and I'm looking forward to a busy semester. It's no secret that there's major stories in the news every day. Some are constant, some are changing, and we're going to try to pay attention both to current news and issues that the coverage raises, and also a broader understanding of the best practices of journalism and the fundamentals of press criticism or media criticism. I'd like to start by saying this, that in this course, there are no wrong answers. It's about following the news, thinking about the news, thinking about underlying issues, doing analysis, and developing opinions. And I have my own opinions. Sometimes I will make them readily apparent. It's not your job to agree with me. In fact, I welcome challenges to your opinion. I think that this asynchronous format makes discussion a challenge, but I would like to assure you that I'm happy to discuss anything, to make appointments either on Zoom or by phone. It's not yet clear when I will be on campus, and for now I will be having office hours on Zoom at your request and by appointment. I thought I'd start just with giving you a little bit of background about myself. I'm now in my 22nd year at Baruch, and just stepped down after 9 years as chair of the department. I've been working in journalism and teaching for many, many years. I've worked at the Associated Press, at the Daily News in New York, at the New York Post, a long stretch at the New York Times, a much shorter stretch at Bloomberg News, and in the past I've freelanced for quite a few publications, although for the last, I guess about 15 years, I've worked more as an editor of articles and books than as a writer or reporter. I grew up in Manhattan, in Inwood, which is just north of Washington Heights, and I'm a proud graduate of the public school system. I went to PS 52, junior high school 152. Wait, I have those backwards. PS 152, junior high school 52, and then Stuyvesant High School. When I graduated from Stuyvesant, I went to CCNY, and years ago, this was back in the 60s, Baruch College was actually part of CCNY. It was called CCNY Downtown. So I feel a real historical connection to CUNY and what it represents and its mission. And before I joined Baruch, I had taught for a decade at NYU, and then I left NYU to go to the New York Times for a decade, and then I taught at Columbia at the Graduate School of Journalism for 7 years. But when Baruch approached me, I really felt like I was coming home. So I'm pleased to be here. I should also mention, because I think this is pertinent in some ways, that when I was growing up, my parents were working class. I grew up in a New York City housing project, the Dyckman Houses, which is over against the Harlem River, runs from 200th Street to 204th Street. One of my exciting memories of that time was that there was a young man in the next building named Lou Alcindor, who later changed his name to Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. And I got to play basketball with him in the playground, and for 1 year be in Little League. One major difference is he was a good athlete, and I wasn't. But I feel with this upbringing and background, I have a great deal in common with many Baruch students and the issues and concerns that you have. And I think it's made me a better journalist, and I think it makes me a better instructor. So I wanted you to know that much about me. I'll just also add that I now live in a very small village in Westchester, just north of Yonkers. And when life is normal, I commute into the city. So, about this course, the first thing I want you to understand is this is not a journalism course that teaches hands-on reporting and editing and interviewing. This is a course in analyzing press coverage. And press is sort of an antiquated term that derives from print media, and print media being printed on printing presses. But when we talk about the press now, we really mean all the news media. The great virtue of saying press is it's one syllable. But we're going to follow a lot of coverage. We're going to read commentary about the coverage, and we're going to think about, what journalism is good, what is not good, how could it be improved, and what should be the basis of assessing coverage and what makes it good. I think we probably all agree that the first and most important thing is that it be accurate. And if news coverage is not accurate, it's not much good. I think that it's nice to have fairness and balance, where you interview and represent different points of view and know who advocates are of a certain position and who opponents of a certain position are. And there are many issues from, almost anything we could think about: education, healthcare, immigration, racial justice issues, social justice issues, where there are different points of view. And I think good journalism should reflect those different points of view and really reach out to a diversity of sources. And one long-standing criticism of the press is that many journalists are overly reliant on the establishment and establishment experts who historically have been white males. And that is changing, maybe not quickly enough, but it's definitely changing. But I think I like to see press coverage that reflects that. So one thing I would ask is, when you think about the world of news media, and we have the major newspapers, surely the three most important newspapers in the United States are the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, and the Washington Post. And they are read nationally and internationally. They have enormous staffs and enormous budgets, and that leaves them a lot of options that smaller news organizations don't have. You also have the major news networks: CBS, ABC, NBC, and their news coverage, which at times is quite dynamic. And I think even though we hear more about CNN and Fox News and MSNBC, the audiences of the traditional broadcast networks is far larger, and they're very important and have created much great journalism over the years, as well as some bad journalism. And of course, the web has changed everything. It enables vast international distribution of all the news organizations that I just mentioned, and it gives us easy access to many more. Part of each day I go to the BBC, the British Broadcasting Corporation, and read their news coverage, because I feel like I want that British perspective on the United States and on issues in the news. And my foreign language skills are not great, so I tend to look for English language publications. But in Moscow, in Hong Kong, in India, in Israel, and many other nations, there is good English language journalism. Of course, if you can follow press coverage in other languages, more power to you. make you a better analyst and a better reader than I am. So, one thing that I think about is, what is the obligation of a news organization to be fair and balanced? Does every news organization have to be that way? Does every news organization have to be even-handed? And I think that there's sort of a tradition in the United States that they should be, although many of them are not. But I wonder how much sense that makes. For instance, if there's a presidential speech or an election debate, is every television and cable news outlet obligated to cover it? About 8 years ago, NBC elected to show a football game instead of a presidential debate, and it was widely criticized for that. Though I remember thinking, well, so what? You could watch this debate on ABC, CBS, CNN, Fox News, MSNBC, PBS, and many other places. So what was wrong with giving viewers a choice? It seems to me that it's not so much that news organizations have to do just one thing, but that viewers and readers have an obligation to themselves and to a better society to have what I call a mixed news diet, by which I mean don't consume just one type of news or from one news outlet. If you're a big fan of CNN, spend some time each day with Fox News. If you rely on the New York Times, as many of our faculty do, I think it's also good to look at the Wall Street Journal, the Washington Post, and if you're interested in other parts of the country, find the good newspapers there, the Miami Herald, the Dallas Morning News, the Los Angeles Times, San Francisco Chronicle, the Boston Globe, the Minneapolis Star Tribune, the Chicago Tribune. I could go on and on and on, but for instance, you've heard about the terrible wildfires out west, and we see coverage of them. But I'm curious about what the California papers, what the Denver Post, what the Idaho Statesman have to say about it, because for them it's a local issue, and it's their readers, their viewers who are being damaged and displaced. I think also if you worry about border issues, the national media do a reasonable job of covering them, but it's also very instructive to look at news organizations that are based on the northern border and the southern border and see what they think, and see what their sources have to say and what their readers have to say. So I think that opportunity is out there and made really relatively simple by the internet, and I encourage you, and to some extent in this course require you, to look at different sources. I think that one thing that has grown increasingly complicated is drawing a line between news coverage and commentary. And I think in many places that line has been blurred. Certainly at CNN and Fox News, but even in the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, the Washington Post, you're sometimes reading a news story, but it has the journalist's judgment and opinions in there. If you want to express that positively, we could say the journalists are providing context or perspective, and that can be a very good thing. On the other hand, there are people who feel, they say, well, I just want the facts, and then I'll make my own judgments. And that's, kind of very straightforward and simplistic. If the president makes a speech in which he lies, do you report what he said? Or do you write a story that says, the president lied again last night, claiming this? If the president or the mayor or the governor reverses a campaign promise or ignores a campaign promise and does the opposite, do you point that out? And do you pointed out very prominently in the story, sometimes just the word selection that a journalist uses shapes how people experience a story and understand a story. So it's very important for journalists to think about that and make wise choices. And this is a classic example from decades ago during the Watergate scandal that led to Richard Nixon's resignation, the only American president to resign, which I think is significant. And there was a period where congressional investigators learned that conversations in the Oval Office had been taped, and they subpoenaed the tapes. And President Nixon's team said, well, we won't give you the tapes. We'll give you transcripts of the tapes that we will edit. So the New York Times, of course, this was the lead story on the front page. The New York Times wrote that President Nixon agreed yesterday to provide congressional investigators with edited transcripts of conversations recorded in his office. And the Washington Post story said President Nixon refused yesterday to turn over tape recordings of conversations held in his office and offered instead edited transcripts. Now, both of those sentences are accurate, and one begins with the president agreed, and the other says the president refused. So it's a little counterintuitive to grasp that both sentences said the same thing, but placed different emphasis in different places. And I think my judgment and the judgment of the history would be the Washington Post got it right. It was an act of refusal, not an act of agreement. But that kind of decision is made every day, many times by journalists in newsrooms, sometimes as part of a team having a discussion, and sometimes people are out there on their own. And we rely on them to make good judgments, but we do need to try to understand when the commentary is obscuring the news coverage or shaping the news coverage. And I think that's not always so easy to do. I think another very important line to examine, and it's something we'll spend a fair amount of time on in this course, is where is the line between the public's right to know and the individual's right to privacy? And journalists are very quick to talk about the public's right to know and to obtain documents that are confidential and sometimes to publish them. And the argument they make is that the public's right to know, the public interest, is more important than an individual's right to privacy. And I think this is an issue in which the courts have ruled different ways in different cases. This is a issue on which there is sometimes great debate, but it's something to think about. And I think that journalists and news organizations like to talk a lot about the rights of a press and the First Amendment. And great, that's really important. But at the same time, I think it's good for journalists and news organizations to think about responsibilities of the press and what do the rights granted confer in terms of responsibilities, and how many journalists and news organizations think about that. I think another important element of this course that I will ask you to read about and think about, and that I will talk about in a subsequent lecture, is what is the role, or what do you think the role should be of a press in this country, in this democracy? It's unlike some countries, the news media in this country are not owned by the state or by political parties, and for the most part they do not openly align themselves or not align, but almost partner with political parties. Like in France, the major news organizations are affiliated with major parties. In Britain, there are major news organizations that are affiliated with the Conservative Party, and there are others that are affiliated with the Labour Party, and that's all open. And I think that that's not the case in the U.S. We're also, have this wonderful guiding principle, the First Amendment, that says, in part, Congress shall make no law restricting freedom of the press. The full text of the First Amendment is in the first Blackboard folder, which I will open up sometime soon, today, Wednesday. It's important to realize that the First Amendment is an amendment to the U.S. Constitution, so it's federal law, and it was adopted in the 18th century. This idea that Congress shall make no law restricting the press was extended by the Supreme Court to cover states and cities and counties and local government as well, but that did not happen until 1931 in a case called Neer versus Minnesota. So where we think First Amendment now, it's not Congress as all government entities shall make no law regarding freedom of the press. There are people who believe this is an absolute principle and there should be no exceptions to it. There are more people, I think, who believe there are some exceptions, and the first one that always pops up is child pornography, which is illegal, and in my view, properly so. So government is making a law restricting freedom of the press. There are laws that make national security exceptions as well. And if you're familiar with the Pentagon Papers case, the government is arguing that publication of these reports would violate national security. And ultimately, the Supreme Court sided with the press and permitted their publication to go forward. There's actually a wonderful movie made a few years ago by Steven Spielberg called The Post, which is about the Washington Post and the court fight over the Pentagon Papers. I will see if that's available to stream, and if it is, I will make it available to you. And there are some cases as well in which the courts have found that individuals' right to privacy should be protected. Sometimes it's a matter of law, more often it's a matter of ethical practices. It's tricky when you have a case where accusers or victims of crimes are filing suit or bearing witness against their attackers, and the press has to decide, are their names essential? Does the public need to know the names of the victims who have been victimized? And there's no clear consensus on that. Some news organizations publish them, some do not. Some say it depends on the crime. But these are things that you should think about, and that I think the readings and some of the other materials that I put forward will ask you to think about those and ask you to respond in some ways. I just, in this context of public interest and right to privacy, and also news coverage versus commentary, I'd just like to tackle the term objectivity, which for many years was held up as the high standard of journalism, and you find people still referring to it. And basically, I think the notion of objectivity is bogus. I think that nobody is really objective, and people are educated in different ways and have information and they're influenced by the information, they're influenced by their own experiences. And I think in good journalism, we want journalists to draw on that knowledge and draw on that experience and help us understand the news. The celebrated author Hunter S. Thompson, who wrote the Fear and Loathing books back in the 1960s and 70s, and who described himself as a gonzo journalist, whatever that means, I'm not sure. But he once said, and I agree with this completely, the only objective reporter I ever saw was the video camera in a supermarket. Back and forth it goes, showing all, editing nothing, making no judgments. So I would say yes, that is objectivity. I think that it's too much to ask, and maybe not even desirable to ask it of news coverage. Rather than objectivity, what I think we can look for is fairness and balance and even-handed treatment. So those are sort of the underlying ideas of this course. I think that the syllabus goes into this in some detail. It explains the requirements and the burden on you and the workload and the grading criteria, and you will have it in your hands on Wednesday afternoon. I think I will only have mapped out I'll give you all the standards and background information, and then the first 6 or 7 weeks of the course with specific readings, because with the arrival of a new governor and some of the things she said and some of the challenges she's immediately facing, some of the policy decisions she needs to make, I think it would be very appropriate to devote a few weeks to looking to New York State and New York City coverage specifically. We have an election for a mayor in the fall. We have an election for the governor the following year. And so I want to hone in a bit from broad national issues to how certain things play in New York City and New York State. So I look forward to working with you. If we are on campus, I hope you'll stop by and introduce yourself. But if we're not, or I'm not, or you don't want to be, we will be able to connect on video. So spiritually, figuratively, my door is open. On my syllabus, you will find my email address and also my cell phone number, because I don't think there's much point in giving you my college number since I'm not going to be there very often. And I will respond to texts and be happy, and email, and be happy to have conversations as they arise. If there are things you don't understand about the assignments or the expectations or the grading, tell me, and I will make them clearer. So I look forward to a good semester, a busy one, but a good one, and I look forward to working with you. Thank you.